I'm so glad you're here for this important episode today. I'm Sarah, your host of What's on Your Plate podcast. And while today's episode is something everyone should hear, I will leave a trigger warning as we are discussing violence within domestic or dating relationships that include physical, emotional, sexual, and psychological abuse, as well as manipulation, intimidation, and other ways abusers oppress people. But this episode discusses ways to seek help and give help too, so I encourage you to listen if you can. But first and foremost, protect yourself, and skip this one if you feel activated. But at the very least, check the show notes for resources and ways to identify domestic violence, seek assistance, and empower yourself. And on that note, let's get started. Okay, so I think we're just going to jump right in because I don't want to waste any time. I'm just going to be so excited to introduce Dr. Misty Hatch to the podcast today. Dr. Misty Hatch is a mental health counselor, and today we're talking about an area of her work that is a bit taboo, often can get covered up or even dismissed in our society. Something anyone can be susceptible to, those who are suppressed as well as those who are in positions of authority. We're talking about the many layers of domestic violence today. Welcome, Dr. Misty Hatch.
Still very weird to hear that. Thank you for having me.
I'm just going to keep saying it over and over in this episode, Dr. Misty Hatch. For our listeners, Dr. Misty Hatch has recently acquired that amazing title. So it's just rolling off my tongue so easily, and it just sounds so amazing that I just want to keep saying it. So again, welcome, Dr. Misty Hatch.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, and hopefully that gets easier to me to hear, because it is just really last week was finishing of that situation. So yeah, so it is a topic that is complex, right? Often not talked about. There's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of shame around domestic violence. So I don't know if you want to just get into that, or if there's any other questions talking about how I got into that. What do you?
Well, I'd love to know why this is one of the areas of your work that is really something that is so important to you.
So my mom was a survivor of domestic violence. So that it was a conversation I've was exposed to the entirety of my life. And I say was because she passed in 2008, not due to domestic violence, but so it was a conversation that we always had. She always talked about violence and was very, very upfront about it wasn't okay, and that if anything happened that I needed in a relationship, that I needed to go immediately. So I think that was unusual, that we had such an open conversation about it. But yeah, she was very, very upfront about her experience and the difficulties of it. So that really started my my passion for that area. When I finished my master's program and started working at Lake County for the Sheriff's Department, we were housed in the Special Victims Unit, and so started doing a lot more work with domestic violence survivors. So again, it was just this place where I was exposed to this very difficult and complex thing. I don't know another way to put it, like thing. So that's really where it started. And realizing that there's such a lack of services, and the services that we do have, they do the best that they can, but we need more. I think the knowledge around domestic violence is lacking. Again, there's stigma associated with it. People don't want to talk about it. People feel very isolated and alone feeling as though they are the only ones that this is happening to, because it is one of those things that we, keep in the house, we don't talk about, we don't tell our friends about. So that's really kind of how I started this journey and passion towards domestic violence survivors. I'm working, Indiana doesn't have this, but I'm licensed in Illinois as a clinician as well. And Illinois has some additional certifications that clinicians can go through to become certified in working with domestic violence survivors. So I did some 80 hours of training for domestic violence and sexual assault. And then you have to work 150 hours at a shelter or a certified domestic violence provider to get this experience working with survivors. And then there's like an exam that has to be taken. But again, I think it's so important because there's so much to it. It's not just my partner hit me and I'm a survivor of domestic violence. It's so much more than that. It's so multi-layered. So I think it's really important to do this additional training to have access to these providers that are helping survivors of domestic violence. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today was the power and control wheel. And it is on the national website, which I think Sarah's going to put all of these different resources on the site because I think it's important to be able to access this stuff. But the wheel of power and control is something that I refer to quite often, and it breaks down a bit more into the different types of domestic violence or intimate partner violence. And so not only is it physical, it can be sexual, it can be emotional, it can be financial. So some of them are using coercions and threats, using intimidation, using emotional abuse, using isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming, using children. One of the ones on here is using male privilege, using economic abuse. So those are all of the different pieces of domestic violence. So I think one of the things that I hope to do is just to advocate and put more of these resources out there so people can identify what is domestic violence. Because I think oftentimes when you ask somebody, have you ever have you ever experienced intimate partner violence? It's like, well, no, they never hit me. But then when you start to ask us some additional questions, like, oh yeah, that does happen. So the economic abuse is preventing that person from getting a job, making them ask for money, giving them an allowance, taking their money, not letting them know about or have access to family income. And then the other one I think that a lot of people don't recognize are the minimizing, denying, and blaming. So making light of abuse and not taking concerns seriously, saying that the abuse didn't happen, shifting responsibility for the abusive behavior, saying the survivor caused it, and then using children. So making them feel guilty about the children, using the children to relay messages, using visitation if they're separated and there's like a court order for visitation, using the visitation time exchange to harass, threatening to take the children away from the survivor. So those are just a few of those ones that I think a lot of individuals don't recognize, like, oh yeah, this isn't okay. This is not really a healthy relationship.
Yeah, as you're like sharing all of that information and all the different layers of ways that abuse can happen, I think there are a lot of things that you just said that people would not initially link to domestic violence or consider domestic violence, but it is for sure. And there's even just situations with people that are in my life that pop up when you're explaining everything that you just did, and even how the abuse can go on after a separation or divorce in way of the harassing and that happened during that child pick up and drop off type of situation. I mean, it's just, it continues even when you have removed yourself from the situation.
Yeah. And I think that is one of the biggest things to recognize is with domestic violence. So we're talking about how abuse can continue even after someone has left the relationship. That's actually one of the most dangerous times is when a survivor finally leaves the situation. The risk of homicide in intimate partner violence increases substantially. It is the riskiest time for a survivor when they leave for that final time. You hear those numbers like it takes 7 to 12 times for a survivor to leave the relationship, and there's so many reasons for that. And that risk of homicide is crucial, and I think that people don't recognize like how dangerous that time is for a survivor when they do leave finally.
That's eye-opening to me because you would think that in the isolating space that is somebody's home where people can't see in and things are hidden better, that would be the most dangerous spot. And it is dangerous, but to hear you say that homicide increases once you've actually left is shocking to hear that.
It's a loss of power, right? So this is the wheel of power and control. Oftentimes abuse is due to power and control. And so in the home, yes, it is dangerous still, obviously the entire time it's dangerous, but there's still that level of power and control. They're able to control them, right? And so when the survivor leaves, it's this loss of power. It's a loss of control, which makes it extremely dangerous.
That's terrifying, Misty.
I know. I know. I know. One of the other huge risk factors in a situation when we're looking at risks of homicide, lethality in a domestic violence situation is if there was strangulation. And so that's another word that when people hear strangulation, what do you think when you hear that term?
I mean, I feel like somebody's hands around my throat or something, restraining my airway somehow, right? Like you're choking me somehow.
But oftentimes people think of this, right? Like we
Yeah,
think
hands on
hands.
throat.
Yes. And that's dangerous too to think of strangulation only in that way. So they've changed sort of the question that they asked in a lethality about has your partner ever made it difficult for you to breathe, specifically because there are other ways to stop that. So if there was a situation in a relationship where strangulation or restricting breath occurs, the risk of homicide lethality actually increases there as well. But it's putting a pillow over your face, covering your mouth, putting hands in your throat, any of those ways where they're restricting breath is that those are one of those things. If we see that, it's like, okay, that upticks the risk of lethality in an intimate partner violence situation.
I mean, I absolutely can understand why that makes sense. And just the need to have to clarify that in order for people to I guess realize or be honest with themselves about strangulation or if they've ever been like forced to like not be able to breathe type of thing. Do you think that that has something to do with I guess people not wanting to disclose the entire truth or admit the entire truth or admit to themselves what's happening?
Yeah, I think that again, there's so much shame and guilt associated with it. Like, how could this happen to me? Like,
Yeah.
how is this happening? Um, and minimizing, right? Minimizing the severity of it because it's really scary and it can be for individuals in that environment, and there's so much shame and guilt around it. So I think whatever we can do to try to minimize how bad it is, that's what we do. And we talk about it being complex, and people are like, well, why don't you just leave? Just leave. And it's not that simple. If it were that simple, people would just leave. So, we talked a little bit ago about the increased risk of lethality when someone leaves. But there's all the other kinds of layers to it, right? So if we're using economic abuse, if that was occurring in the household, right? So they don't have access to money, they don't have access to a job. That makes it a little bit more difficult to leave, right? If we don't have support. So we have this use of isolation. So we've now isolated a person. So now they don't have a support system, they don't have money. Minimizing, blaming, using intimidation and coercion and threats. So now my self-worth is in the garbage, right? It's in the gutter because I've been told that I'm worthless, that no one cares about me, that I'm a terrible mother, I'm lazy, I can't keep a job. All of these things add to my ability to think like I can get out of this. Like, I don't believe I can get out of this. Even if I can see like, oh, this is really dangerous and this isn't okay. The alternative is like, what? What's the alternative? I can't do anything. I'm worthless, right? I'm lazy. I'm XYZ. So that's a part of the complication. And the other complication is love, right? Love. We think because the person is abusive, we should be able to just shut off that love. And you can't. If we could, if love had a light switch, that would make things so much easier for so many people, right? Not just in an intimate and violent situation. But love doesn't have a light switch. It doesn't just go away because we know that things are not all right. We love a person, which makes it harder. And there's a cycle with domestic violence, right? There's this honeymoon phase, then there's the abuse happens, and then the honeymoon phase, right? And then it's like it's just kind of the calm before the storm. And so it's confusing, right? Like, you're telling me you hate me, you're hurting me, you're doing all of these things, but as soon as it's over, I see the guilt and shame from my partner, like, I'm so sorry, this will never happen again. I love you so much, and blah, blah, blah. So it's hard. It's complicated and it's hard. And I think that as someone that's not in the situation, we just sit there and we're just like, well, just leave. Like, we know that it's not okay that they're doing this to you, so just leave. And we're unable to kind of sit on their side and recognize how complex it is.
Yeah, I really feel what you're talking about with that last part you just said, being somebody that isn't directly involved in a domestic situation, but knowing somebody very close to me that had been and is in a very, you know, uh, that has been and is involved in a domestic violence situation. It is very easy for me to say, just get the fuck out of there. Like, why can't you just leave? Look at the example you're showing to your children. Is this what you want them to see? Like, you've got to like do something different. And it's easy for me to say that, being detached from the actual situation. Even it's easy for me to say, knowing that things could get worse for them if they left, because I can also understand the situation now that we're talking about this in depth a little bit more. There was absolute fear with the person that I know in regards to like fear of me. I was afraid when they were in their home, like with their spouse. But I remember the moment that they told me that they were leaving, and just to know that, and like my my fear monitor like went so much higher, because I was afraid of what they might do if she left, essentially, or when she left. And it was, she's not local, I couldn't even go help, kind of thing. And it was scary for sure. But yeah, just being on the outside looking in, it's so easy to just really not understand why, for one, you found yourself in this situation, and two, why you continue to stay, and three, why you won't accept the help that is offered to you to get out of it. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So the help accepting the help that's offered. Tell me more about that. What does that mean?
Well, just being able to have somewhere to go. like, I think people in the situation of that often feel like, well, where am I even going to go? And what am I even going to do? And how am I even going to, afford anything? And being able to offer somebody a solution in that way, in terms of, you can stay here and I will, feed you, and I will,
Oh,
whatever you need to get over this hump. Like,
you'll
help you get it.
let me feel as though I'm a burden to you.
Yeah.
I already, right? Like
Right.
so look at yourself. Would you uproot yourself, your kid, your dog, and just go stay at someone's house, even though they're saying, hey, come and stay with us? Would you not feel as though you were a burden?
And I get what you're saying. I mean, I would feel a huge sense of urgency and move on and move out type of thing from that help. I 100% agree with that. But
Yeah.
as somebody that isn't in that situation and trying to, like, my codependency is on high alert when this type of situation is in front of me. It's like, I can't be okay unless you're going to be okay. And you need to come here so we're both okay, kind of thing. And then remembering that I can't solve people's lives.
Yes, yes, yes. So as someone who wants to help, what can we do to help?
Yeah.
We can support them in whatever way they need us to, right? Like, hey, I'm not here to tell you what you should and shouldn't do. I'm here to help you and support you in any way that I need to, or any way that I can. If you want me to go with you to the shelter, I'll go with you to the shelter. If you want me to call the shelter and see if there's places available, if you want me to find out about classes, I can do that. If you want to keep an emergency bag in my house, I could do that. If we need to have a code word, let's have a code word. If you need to have a safety plan, let's put a safety plan together. I will support you in the way that you need me to support you. I'm not going to tell you what you have to do. I'm going to tell you I'm concerned about you. I'm worried about you. I care about you. And I want to do whatever I can do to help you. And we have to empower survivors, right? Like we have to, they've already had their power taken away. So me telling you that you have to just come and stay at my house and I'll do this,
Yeah.
what is that doing, right? Like you're now dependent on me. So I want to empower you. So I'm going to empower you however I can. Taking you to see a counselor, right? Helping you with your resume, whatever it is,
Yeah.
like putting little things away for you. If you wanted to give me $5 a week and I can just put that into an account so it's not at your house and so there's no, whatever you can do to empower that person to make the decision that makes the most sense for them.
And what you just said there makes so much sense. You have to empower them. It's, again, not thinking that you can swoop in and fix everything for them. Like, that's never going to work. They're just going to feel heavier than what they felt before. And it makes total sense when you're speaking about it in that way. So really, like, finding out what they need, let them take the lead on that, and then just do what you can to assist.
And being there, right? With no judgment, unconditional, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and judge you for going back. I understand why you go back. We look at the statistics, 7 to 12 times it takes for a survivor to leave for the last time. 7 to 12. I'm not here to tell you that, well, this is number 8. I can't believe you're going back again. That doesn't help, right? That doesn't
Right.
help. They already know. Most
Mhm.
survivors, they already know that this isn't great. They don't need the people around them just making this even worse, right? So
Mhm.
empowerment is really the lens we want to come from, empowering them in whatever way we can to, again, give them their power back, give them their control over their life again, because it's been taken from them.
That all makes such perfect sense. Thank you for sharing that, because I think, um, well, not I think, I know, because I've been in that situation where it felt like I wanted to just fix the things. And I think a lot of us feel that way, especially when you're emotionally connected to somebody, when it's a family member, when it's a close, and it's just maddening for the person watching, to see somebody they love being hurt. Um, but everything you just shared is amazing, and I know that it's going to really empower people to, help in a better way, help in a way that actually helps. um, what are some of the ways that, or maybe the better question is, are there ways that people can foresee something like this situation happening for them before they're even in it? Are there things that we could be opening our eyes to better that we are disregarding early on.
Well, I think one of the first things that came to mind as you started to ask that question is recognizing that domestic violence can happen to anyone, anywhere. It is not prejudice. It does not discriminate. It can happen to anyone and everyone, male, female, non-binary, same-sex couples, heterosexual couples, any relationship, right? Any socioeconomic state. And I think that there is this misconception that if you are educated and successful in your career, and I put air quotes for successful because we all define success in different ways, right? But I'm just saying like financially successful, it couldn't happen to you, right? And that's not true, that it can happen to anyone. So I think recognizing that anyone could be in this situation is one of the first steps. The second step, I think, is having the conversation about what is domestic violence, talking about using intimidation, isolation, emotional abuse, kind of talking about these things that are happening, because I think people don't recognize, like, oh, when someone is threatening to leave, threatening to report me to CPS, making me do illegal things, destroying property, abusing pets, making me feel afraid by just looks. So nothing's really happened, right? But I know if you give me this look, like it's not okay. Someone putting me down, calling me names, making me think that I'm crazy, humiliating me, making me feel guilty. So recognize like, hey, these are some things that I need to be aware of. Just because this happens doesn't mean it's gonna escalate, right? But just being aware of some of these signs so we can start to recognize like, hey, like this isn't okay. I'm not okay with this. Shift, so minimizing, denying, and blaming, so shifting responsibility for abusive behavior, saying that I caused it, just I think awareness and education about what domestic violence is one of the first steps.
Yeah,
So
that makes a lot of sense.
know what it looks like, right? Like, well, this person never hit me, so it's not that. And it's like, well, have any of these other things happen? And it can just be a way to like, oh, okay, I'm gonna keep an eye on that. And this isn't okay with me, and in recognizing some of those earlier signs.
Yeah, some of the more subtle things I think should be brought to people's attention a little bit more. One of them that really stood out, you mentioned, is just restricting finances or not having somebody allowed to have access to finances, even finances, and not even just maybe what's we'll call their own finances, but like family finances. That's pretty disturbing to like feel like you have to ask permission to have money to acquire anything really. And also something that has been known to me before with people that I've known that have been in this situation is not allowing them to take care of themselves or to achieve wellness. There was a situation where a husband actually broke his wife's treadmill because he felt that she was losing too much weight, and that threatened his power over her.
Yeah, it threatened his ability to control her, right? Like if you're empowered physically, wellnessly wise, like that's scary for an abuser because you feel empowered. If you feel empowered in that way, when's the shift going to happen that you're going to feel empowered and I can't do this anymore? I can't control you and have power over you. Yeah, absolutely. I do want to say, we have to also know culture, right? So we always have to be aware of a culture. So every culture isn't the same, right? And so some cultures are there is a separation, right? There are gender roles and things like that. And so being mindful of culture, because we don't want to assume like, oh, this is a domestic violence situation if it's a cultural piece, right? However, even saying that, we do want to be aware of in situations where culture is a bit different, domestic violence can still happen. But I just want to have that, I just wanted to give that caveat. Like, we don't want to just make this assumption of, with the money situation or the male privilege, like different cultures have different pieces, right? And so we have to be very mindful of that. So I just thought it was important to acknowledge just that piece.
Yeah, that is a good point as well. And I know what you mean by that. There are different roles played by partners in different cultures and situations for sure. But as you said, like sometimes it can absolutely be taken too far.
Yes.
And those are, I think, what would I say? Those are situations where you have to really like look at all the pieces, maybe in a different lens or something, to take a closer look. And as the professional that you are, I'm sure that you are able to identify that more than the average person would be able to, in regards to that cultural versus violence or domestic violence situation.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about the way that you are helping people that find themselves in this situation. How do you present for them and show up for them in your work?
I mean, I try to just come from a lens of unconditional acceptance, right? And non-judgmental. And my job isn't to tell you what to do. My job isn't to say that this is what you need. My job is just to empower you to make whatever decision makes sense. I talk about safety planning. Even if you're not going to leave, creating a safety plan. And on some of the links that you'll have on there is a place you can go and you can create your own safety plan. And it's just something to have. So I'm going to help you in whatever way that is. So I just try to come from that lens of empowerment. That's what I try to do. Continuing to educate myself on this. I think there's been a shift in the language, right? So I think we used to hear domestic violence, a victim, right? A victim of domestic violence. And we've shifted that to a survivor. So again, it's that piece of empowerment, and it's just that small shift, but that's so huge and so crucial to recognize someone as a survivor rather than a victim. Because when we place that label of victim on them, what are we doing? We're again taking away their power. So just coming from a place of empowerment and doing what I can. I just finished my doctorate program, and so now I can like do some additional like research and things like that. And I would love, my goals are to put together some workshops and things that talk more about how to identify domestic violence, what we can be doing as family, friends, and providers for this population. Doing some more research on it. I think that there is a lack of research. There's gaps in research on male survivors of domestic violence. I mean, we already know that there's a stigma. We already know that there's shame associated with it. And when we look at male survivors, there's a gap. It's not talked about. We look at African Americans, there again is a gap in research. If we look at the LGBTQ plus community, there's a gap in research because this happens across the board, right? It doesn't matter who you are, how you present, it could happen to anyone.
Yeah, I am really glad that you said all of that and are shining a big light on just how diverse domestic violence is and how it does not isolate itself to any one group of people. And I love that the word victim has been changed to survivor. As you say, just changing that stigma and changing the way that people identify with the situation that they have been in, identifying as a survivor versus a victim. I think that in and of itself is so empowering. Because words are really important. The words that we speak into our brains are critical in order for us to have a vision of what we can do moving forward. So I love that so much. How do things like, tell me about the different layers of domestic violence that includes dating violence, particularly for teens as they're entering the world of partnership with people, intimate partnership. How does that relate? And do we call it the same thing? Do we call dating violence domestic violence? Is it in the same spectrum of things?
Yeah, it's teen dating violence is what it's recognized as. And there, again, there's physical violence, there's sexual violence, psychological aggression, stalking. Um, and teens often think that behaviors like name calling, teasing are normal parts of relationships. But they can be abusive, right? They could lead to something more serious. So about 1 in 12. So in 2019, the CDC did a survey among US high school students who had reported dating during 12 months before the survey, so like throughout 2018. And about 1 in 12 experienced physical dating violence, and 1 in 12 experienced sexual dating violence. So those are the ones that took the survey, right? Those are the ones that recognize, hey, this was something. So how many of them, how much higher is that number? So female students have a higher rate of physical and sexual dating violence than males. Again, I take a lot of these statistics with a grain of salt because of who's reporting, right? And we know that typically females seek out services more often than males, right? So I think that the male statistics may be lower than or be higher than they're actually reported because of reporting in the stigma around it. So the LGBTQ community is at a higher risk of dating violence as well. So in this situation, what do? We talk about it, right? We tell students, hey, here's what domestic violence is. Here's what to do. Here are resources. I think just showing what it could look like so that people recognize like, oh, hey, this isn't acceptable behavior. Like this is not okay. And I think that that's part of how we prevent it. Talking about it, supporting healthy relationships, talking about what a healthy relationship looks like. So there's some really great resources out there on teen dating violence as well. And this is kind of an off top, well, it's kind of a tangent, like going back to what complicates leaving. And I just wanted to talk about this piece for a second. Animals, pets can prevent people from leaving because a lot of times you can't take your pet with you to a shelter.
Yeah, that makes a million percent sense to me.
Yes. So as an animal lover, I was like, oh yes, I had that as a note, like go talk about that. And then
Yeah.
I lost it. But I think that that's important to recognize too. And some people are like, oh, just like take your dog to the shelter, like just drop them off here. Like you have to get out, and like you're more important than your animal. And that's dismissive, right? Like that's not what they need. They don't need you to tell them what's important to them and what's not important to them. So there are some programs that have some relationship with some of the shelters that if a person comes into a domestic violence shelter, they coordinate with some of the animal shelters so that your dog could stay there. They have some adoption foster programs available. But again, the biggest piece is lack of resources, lack of funding, lack of everything. But that is another piece that I think that people don't put a lot of attention to as to why it's hard to leave, how complicated it is to leave. But pets are a big part of it. And a lot of times in domestic violence situations, if there's a pet that the survivor is attached to, a way the perpetrator can hurt them is by hurting their pet. So
That's
I know.
unbelievable. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that because I think it gets dismissed a lot. Like, what are you leaving behind when you leave, type of thing, and the different things that keep us in oppressive situations is so real.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great mention. Thank you for bringing that up. I surely would not be leaving my dog behind.
Right.
Absolutely not. And I know that you'd be the same. And you have a whole farm you'd have to take with you.
Yeah, I don't know. Like nobody's gonna take them all in. Yeah.
Thankfully, that's not something that you have to worry about. I know that you have an amazing relationship. But yeah, those struggles are real, and putting light on those real struggles is something that is so necessary. And I'm really glad you did again. Um, I would love to hear your thoughts too on what the definition of sexual violence is and how it pertains to domestic violence or violence. And is it an extension of those things, or is it considered separate? And is it different than abuse? Is it different than sexual abuse? Like, how are we defining that?
Well, I think so. I teach over at VU, the master's program, and my response to so many of the questions that my students ask me is, it depends.
That's
And
fair. Okay.
it does, right? It really just depends. So sexual violence can look like so many different things, right? We do have some charges that a person can be charged with. There can be a component of a sexual abuse, some sexual assault, sexual battery, that kind of a piece can be added to a charge of domestic battery. But sexual abuse, I mean, it really can be, it can be anything. I don't know, actually, now that you're asking me that, what Indiana defines it as a crime. Um, I will have to look it up and let you know, because I'm sure that there are certain criteria that has to be met in order for it to be deemed a sexual assault related to a domestic violence case. So
I would love to know if you could give us an example of possibly a difference between sexual violence versus sexual abuse.
well, I think when we think of sexual abuse, we often think of like minors, right?
Mhm.
So sexual battery is touching a person um in a way like their genitals, their pubic area, their buttocks, using force, um, using different organs, compelling to submit by threat or of force. If a person is disabled, um, so when you're looking at the legal piece of it, that's all going to be in the Indiana code, and they're going to define it in the way that they have to define it in order to make that charge relevant. It could be using a substance like drugs or alcohol, right? And then assaulting someone. So I think I have to say, like, that just, it depends on the definition of the Indiana code on how we define that legally, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you for sharing some of that insight, because I think those can get blurred a bit.
Mhm.
And just wanting to pull that part of it into the conversation today. Because as we mentioned early on in the conversation, there are many different layers of domestic abuse. And I feel like if there's a blanket term that I would come up with for domestic violences, I mean, anything that puts somebody else in a position of power over you, I feel like qualifies as domestic violence.
If there's like an intimate partner relationship, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, whether somebody is physically harming you, whether they are emotionally wearing you down, whether they are bullying and gaslighting, I feel like those are all ways that we find ourselves in harm's way.
Yeah. And with the sexual piece, I mean, it can be pressuring you to engage in sexual behaviors that you're not comfortable in, right? Degrading, unwanted, just pressured, forced, or just doing things that you're not comfortable doing. Those are all things that kind of fall under that sexual violence piece.
There's a conversation that I was part of some time ago, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this, and if it is something that would be in that bucket of sexual violence, even with committed couples or married couples. Somebody is wanting intercourse and the other does not, and the person that does not just sort of submits and gets it over with, so to speak, in a way of just wanting to be left alone, and having the advances stop, sort of. It's not rape, but it's almost an extension of it in that it is unwanted.
Yeah, you could call that sexual abuse, right? Or sexual violence, sexual assault, because it's this pressure to do it. I mean, rape though, I mean, if we look at the definition of rape, it's not, right? Like it's this pressured, could be pressured, unconsented, non-consensual intercourse. And until I thought this was pretty interesting, that marital rape is rape committed by a survivor's spouse, as opposed to like a non-married intimate partner. But until 1976, states exempted spousal rape. So it wasn't even recognized as a thing. Like if you were married, it wasn't possible. And so I thought it was interesting that Nebraska was the first state to legally recognize non-consensual intercourse with a spouse is rape. And by 1993, all 50 states had completely or partially like repealed that exclusion of a spouse not being able to commit the act of rape.
That's amazing to me, but it is just also a testament of how there are absolutely definitely different seats of power, and the assumption that because you're married, you or in a committed relationship, you are consenting to something that you are not.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of people, I think, don't believe that marital rape is actually a thing, although there's like between 10 to 14% of married women will be raped at some point during their marriage. Again, where is that number at, right? Like where is that number at?
I think that's probably a lot higher than that statistic shares, but it's also just a realization of I don't know that it's even completely dissipated, but it's a realization of how up until recent history, I mean, women were considered property of their husbands, not partners. Yeah. So, those laws coming into place in not that long ago history is a testament of just how women forever have been used as property and tools of men, essentially, and have been oppressed. And I mean, we've come a long way for sure, but wow, Misty, there's so much farther to go.
We have a lot more to go. Yeah.
How do you protect yourself? I mean, for somebody like yourself that like is literally in the trenches and elbow deep in these type of traumatic situations day in and day out, how do you protect your energy and cleanse yourself just emotionally from all of the things that can attach themselves to your emotions with this type of work?
I mean, I'd be lying if I said that it doesn't affect me, right?
I can't imagine that it doesn't.
It does. So I think, it's really important for me consulting with other clinicians when something's really heavy, like having consultation, really having that separation between like work and life, right? I went to I don't remember if I was in Italy or Ireland last year through my doctoral program. And there was another clinician that I had met there who talked about, and I've kind of stolen this separation between what we do and like coming home. And so they said how when they get home, they literally take those work clothes off, right? And like that's the way we separate it, right? Like just getting out of that mode, physically, tangibly taking our clothes off and putting on something else. So we're able to sort of shift that mindset of where we are. So trying to do that, right? Like on my drive home, if I'm at the office, just using that time to just sort of decompress and sort of leaving that stuff after I get out of the vehicle, right? Knowing that I have to, having that conversation, like I can't carry this. Like my job is to hold space. My job is to empower. I can't save the world, right? I wish I could. I'd save everybody and bring them all to my farm. Um, so just having that conversation, I think having an amazing supportive spouse is helpful. He makes life better. So having someone that is there to support me, having the farm, I told you the other day when we spoke, like I finished my dissertation defense. So this huge big deal. I get my title and then shortly thereafter I'm out in the barn shoveling manure. So it's like this way of like bringing me back. Like, yes, I do this thing and it's really important. But like, hey, like you still got to do this stuff. So having my animals, having the farm is really a grounding thing for me and a way to make me really present. And I it's so necessary. Um, and just boundaries, right? Like it's difficult, but making sure I maintain those boundaries and recognizing that that I can't carry it all. I can't. In order to do the work that I want to do, I have to do that, right? I have to separate it because if I let my cup run empty, then I'm not able to help anymore. So making sure I keep my cup full.
I love that. Um, I feel like you are so leveled in just what you're doing in regards to your own mental wellness. And um, I just love that you have your farm to use in that way. Um, and for our listeners, her farm is a vegan friendly farm, yes?
It is. It is.
Yes. So Dr. Misty Hatch is also a plant-based advocate, and all of her animals are in safe hands. I'll just say.
Even we have way too many roosters. So I don't know if you know anything about chickens, but you're only supposed to have about one rooster per about 10 hens. And we got these chickens, and about 10 of them are roosters. So we have like 21 total, and 10 of them are roosters. So it's this everyone's like, oh, just get rid of them and do this, but nobody wants roosters. Like nobody wants them because they're mean. I have a couple of roosters that straight up like attack me. One of my roosters chased down our 8-year-old nephew and was just like trying to get him. And has jumped at me yesterday, was literally just jumping at the run, like trying to spur me. But I go out there and I have like protective pants on and I separate the roosters and the hens, and when they fight, I like separate them out and I make sure I clean up their wounds. I came home and one of my roosters was just covered in blood because they're fighting. And so I took him into the barn and I wiped all of his blood off and I'm putting this medicine on him. And I was like, okay, well, you stay in this little house. And my husband says, like, listen, man, this is your deal then. Like, you deal with the chickens. So I do deal with the chickens. But I don't want to get rid of them. I can't, like, how could I say like, oh, well, you get to die and you get to die? Like, I'm just like, well, I'll figure it out. Like, you can stay in this run and you can stay in this run and you do this and you do that. And it's just this constant like rotation of how do I take care of these
Yeah.
things.
Well, and not to like go down a rabbit trail with this or divert too far off of our topic today, but I really feel like because of your compassionate heart that already exists because you are an advocate for animals, like you are able to transfer that energy to your clients. Like you already have a compassionate heart of like caring and like well-being of all beings, right? So I feel like that is something that is really essential for you in just the care you bring to your work. I really feel like that's connected somehow. And everything you're doing is just so inspiring. It truly is. Like, I've been sitting throughout this entire conversation, like on the brink of tears for many reasons. Just because I'm so proud of you, for one, and just watching what you do. And also because this topic has touched my life in various ways. But just knowing that there's people like you out there, like doing this important work and fighting for like the well-being of people, it's just awe-inspiring, Misty, truly.
Thank you. That means a lot. It's I think it's just important, and I feel like, you know, my shift from like becoming a mental health clinician was really based in I wanted to make a difference in the world. And I just didn't feel like I was doing that. And I don't know if I really am, right? Like I don't know if I am or not, but like I want to do something that puts me in a place that I can do something that matters. And I try to just live by that, like just making a difference as small as I can.
Yeah. And I think that as long as you're walking in the direction of something that feels right in your heart, you're absolutely making a difference every day. And the things that we think are small are astronomically big to somebody else. So just keep walking that walk. I love what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
If you were to leave our listeners with some final thoughts today, what would they be?
In order, you know, I think it's really important in order for us to make a difference in the world, we have to take care of ourselves. And I think that it is difficult and we run ourselves ragged often. And so taking time to just pause, taking time to be present and grounded, um, in order to do the work that you want to do is really important. I don't know if that's a great final thought, but I just like that's just sort of what's coming to mind is just like making sure you take care of yourself in whatever way you can, right? Like we talk about self-care and people imagine like, oh, well, I don't have an hour to go get a massage or go and do this. And it's like, it doesn't have to be something big, right? It could be a post-it note on your mirror, like you're enough today, right? It could be putting your feet on the ground and just grounding. It could be chasing a rooster, whatever it needs to be, right? Like just doing something to just ground yourself, and check in, like, right? Like do this scan, like where am I at today? What's going on with me? I do a lot of body work, right, in my practice, and so just sort of noticing where am I noticing this? Is my heart racing? Are my shoulders tight? Is my jaw tight? And just kind of being aware of what's happening in your body. And if you notice like it's really tight, it's really tense, and this is happening, doing something that nourishes you is important.
That makes absolute sense to me. Dr. Misty Hatch, thank you for this amazing, phenomenal just conversation today. I just can't thank you enough for being here and sharing your wisdom and just your insight on such a important topic. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. I will send you my contact information if anybody has questions, if they need resources, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll give you all of those other resources as well. But I'm here as a resource. You know, if you need something, if you know somebody that needs something, let me know, and I'm happy to do what I can, in whatever way that is. And thank you for the kind words. Thank you for reaching out and for inviting me here. It's been an honor.
I've loved it. And for our listeners, always to stay connected with Dr. Misty Hatch, as well as to find ways to pursue help, resources to just look at for your own well-being or the well-being of those that you love will be in the show notes. So definitely take a look there and reach out if you need help And just as she has said, check in with yourself, be kind to yourself, and just know that you matter. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you.
Some of the hardest conversations are the most important ones. The stigmas surrounding domestic violence will only get better if we continue to talk about it and offer light to the survivors living in the darkness, as well as dismantling the power of the abusers. No one, for any reason, deserves to live in fear of someone who is supposed to love them. If you or someone you know needs help reclaiming your power, contact Misty directly or use any number of the resources listed in the show notes. Until next time, loves, take care of you.